Hello and welcome to the J plus R movie podcast, Back to Normal. We will be taking a look at obvious tie-in to the upcoming Batman Mask of the Phantasm, the movie of Batman, the animated series. I don't even think I need to go into any detail about how famous of a series that was, how much it really brought the Batman character into the forefront in terms of popularity and entertainment. It came at around the same time as Batman and Batman Returns, but I think this pushed it even further into the character and all his rogues and all the people that you just know off the top of your head.
I still think it's the best representation of Batman outside of the comic books there's ever been.
I agree, and I think the reason why that is because animated, it's able to just capture what live action inherently can't capture. So it's like being a TV series just explores so much. Similar fashion to a comic book series as well.
Yeah, sure, it does, because it is like one ongoing serial narrative of like different stories that always come in and come up, and they're sort of connected, but not really. And you can get emotional through lines without having to worry too hard about where exactly every case happens, which is really, really great. I think things for me that really made the animated series special, I think there's three things. The voice work, which is just phenomenal. For something that was aimed at kids, it's a surprisingly dark and mature series.
The animation style was the kind that a kid could latch onto, but the tone, the atmosphere, the stories, the content, the characters, all of that stuff is like, as a kid, you could still get into it and still enjoy it. But I think it just benefits so much watching it as an adult.
99% of that show I can still watch really happily as an adult without cringing at all. It did not talk down to kids at all without excluding them. And I think that's a really tough balancing act. Also, just the writing of the series generally was really, really, really good. There's a couple of episodes here and there that aren't great. Looking at you, I've got Batman in my basement. But then you get stuff like Over the Edge and Mad Love, Mad as a Hatter, and things like that that are just still, to a lot of people, the definitive origin stories of a lot of characters. I completely missed off Heart of Ice there, and that's just not allowed. Massive reinventions of these really classic characters that turn them into like household villains, like Mr. Freeze before Batman the Animated Series was nowhere near as tragic or interesting as a character. What the animated series did for that was amazing. I mean, this is where Harley Quinn comes from. It had a good track record with original characters, which is a really nice segue into getting into the film.
It's a pure standalone story where it's about a new criminal that comes in called the Phantasm, and he takes inspiration from Batman. He looks very similar, and he ends up in the process framing Batman for a series of these murders of criminals. This story ends up not only bringing Bruce Wayne into contact with his former love interest, Andrea, but also ends up giving us an idea of his origins, how he as a man became Batman, and also the complicated emotional reasonings as to why these murders are happening in the first place. Like, some people would consider this to be the best Batman film that's ever been made. It's very, very strong competition, I think. It's even like the best pre-Dark Knight film, pre-Dark Knight trilogy film that we got. In fact, you can kind of even look at this film and see it almost as being quite similar to Batman Begins in a sense. And for you, I can see why you love this one, because I think Begins is your favorite of the trilogy.
Begins is my favorite of the Dark Knight trilogy, although I do adore the Dark Knight and I do agree it's the best one. I just prefer Batman Begins. This is my favorite Batman film so far. It's just nails the character in a way that I don't think, like I said, I don't think it's been done outside of the comics that well. And it's a proper detective film as well. It's film noir, which, if you can make a proper film noir Batman film, it's going to be tough to top that for me, because I love film noir. You know I love film noir. So if you get two of my favourite things and you put them together and then you put them with Batman, that's pretty much a home run for you, which is exactly what this film is. So on a personal level, it does affect me because it's what I like, but it's also a deep and emotional story that looks personally at Bruce Wayne. The way that Gotham looks, the way that it's played up, the way that Batman kind of acts, and the way he is, and just that look deeply into why he is who he is. It's just brilliant. I think it's the Batman films that are out there that puts Batman as the protagonist and like properly as a protagonist, even though he's the protagonist in others, but it's the one that takes the time to explore him psychologically and make him the most human that we've seen him.
I agree with all of that. What helps it stand out is it looks at a period that hasn't always been explored in the most detail. And that's, again, when he's a young man trying to work out who Batman is and then properly becoming Batman. Because this one doesn't cover the Wayne murders or anything, although his parents do clearly play a part in the narrative. It looks at like the early days when he's just like dressing up in like a balaclava trying to stop criminals and it's clearly not working. And you see the progression of how he then becomes the guy who wears the cowl. What I think the film does very effectively, you can say it's about Batman, but I think that this movie also has another protagonist, and that's Andrea Beaumont. Andrea Beaumont is someone who you understand just as much as Bruce Wayne. And what's great is that because of the ending reveal that she's the Phantasm, it's a hero and villain dynamic, hero and love interest dynamic, and also a kind of dueling anti-hero dynamic as well.
I think also what's a really interesting part of the dynamic is they are literally a broken mirror image of each other. Same choice to develop in the same sorts of ways, and because they were tied together and they always will be, it's this really deeply tragic love affair that's never gonna be what it could have been. There is a lot of the film that's all about the broken promise for a future, because although they've managed to make a life for themselves in their pain and in their misery, there was a better future that they never got to have.
And I love how it utilizes reincorporation and visual storytelling, because there's that bit early on where they're going on the date to that theme park-esque place, the future of the world or something. It's supposed to be some sort of like metropolitan evolution technology thing. And then not only is that where the Joker is hiding out, but that's also where the climax takes place, and that place ends up getting blown up. And it's already in ruins anyway. The future has been ruined based on the tragedy of the past, and also what's going on there now anyway, and that stuff comes from the past too. I thought that was a great touch.
I feel like they blew it up as well, because that thing, it represented all hope for the future.
Mhm.
Although it was tarnished, you could technically have brought something back from what was there, even while the Joker was in it, and then by blowing up completely, there's nothing to build on there. It's done, and I think that really adds to the tragedy of the ending of the film.
And there is a little bit of hope because there's the locket that was left. There's also the final scene with Andrea, although she does indicate that she's alone, which could have been there to suggest the whole notion of vengeance feeling empty. We don't see the Joker again, and in the rest of the series, he's alive. But what I think is that she actually decided not to kill the Joker, or maybe even the Joker got away and she just stopped pursuing him. So that's what I think, because I was a little bit confused, but then I thought to myself, I think that's what they're going for. Do you think that's what they were going for?
I mean, yeah, I think they were going for, more along the line of trying to go after the Joker didn't change anything, and that she was moving on, or she was trying to at least, or she was choosing to live her life without trying to have that revenge in her. But it's interesting that you kind of perceive that ending as a little bit of hope, because I still, even with her being alive, even now, I actually do it as that last bit of hope being ripped out, because he still had that perspective that had he managed to do something better, or had he changed anything, there might have been the possibility of a future for them. But by dropping that locket back, it completely shuts the door on that connection, because she's not carrying it with her anymore.
I guess hope in the sense that, again, she had potentially stopped being vengeful, or at least had maybe realized how empty that had felt, or how alone she now was as a result of killing these people and pushing out Bruce as well. There is that sense of won't get worse. I do agree that it is a fairly sad ending. Weirdly, even the final swing feels kind of sad. It almost feels like Bruce is saying, oh, this is just what I have to do. I just have to keep being Batman. I can't have a normal life. Like typically when that happens, there's at least some semblance of heroism to the final time that you see Batman in many of the films. In this, being Batman is better than being the Phantasm. Technically a good thing, not anything that brings him any joy.
I mean, at the end of it, he is just a broken man. That's what he is. Batman seems less like a boy who's attempting to be a hero and more like the only thing he's got left. I think doing it like that, it feeds into the tragedy of the whole film. It leaves you almost wishing that Bruce could have found something.
Or he could have just stopped being Batman.
I think that's one of the interesting things about the film. Even going into the comics, even going into anything else, like there's never really a depiction of Batman in the early days going, Joe, I'm not sure I want to be Batman. Having him fall in love and question everything was actually a really genius decision, because it makes Batman that much darker, that much more of a creature of pain. And don't go wrong, he didn't need the extra support, but it also, as an adult, it showed it being the conscious choice to shut himself off, and it was his choice to pretty much just continue his trauma.
It's one of the things I really like about Dark Knight Rises is that they finally gave an answer to that for the most part a lot of adaptations hadn't really done. It gave an ending for Batman, and that's one of the reasons why I really like it. It's definitely one of the more thoughtful and interesting ways of keeping the status quo intact as well, because as standalone as it is, it's also not a film that exists necessarily to throw like a wrench in the animated series or anything like that, or push it in a different direction. It's more just its own self-contained thing. In fact, you could probably watch it before watching any of the show at all. Like, this could be your first one, and then I think the rest of the series would probably have a completely different context.
That is actually my experience of the film. I saw the film before I saw the series. I actually like to see the film as taking place before the start of the series, and it doesn't quite make sense because of a couple of the way the early episodes of the series are like. But it's the way that I like to watch it. For me, then it gives a much more positive arc to Batman. You almost get to see him have connections in his life again, then lose them again. That is the way with animated Batman, though, because if you go forward to and beyond, you've still got, I mean, the Phantasm's still around for one, as the assassin, so you know that she never got over it. Bruce, a lot of the happiness he managed to build up in the animated series, he lost again, but then he's rebuilding it again. For him, it's this constant cycle. And I think watching Mask of Phantasm and Return of the Joker back to back is actually quite a fun experience.
I mean, a pretty depressing one, though, because both of them are super dark. Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, probably even more so than this one. And this one's like pretty dark and violent for a PG animated film as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this one's the most tragic of the two, but the darker of the two is definitely Return of the Joker. I think on the violence, because this film does not shy away from things like blood and teeth. The shadow work with the Joker's attack on the Congressman is genuinely horrific. And then you've got like the way that, you'll see victims with the big wide smiles or fairly grisly murders by the Phantasm for a PG-13 thing where you get to stay with the fear of the mobsters.
Batman is technically chasing down a serial killer. But what I do really like about it is that it actually does have a very, very complex story, to the point where it is surprising that this movie is only 72 minutes without credits. Probably even less if you remove the opening credits. They pack in quite a heavy amount, enough to make it not feel like just an extended episode. Like, I would say, as far as making a film out of a TV show, like especially an animated one, this is one of the most definitive examples of it's a film and not just an episode with stuff added to it to make it longer.
It's a film. It's got its three-part narrative arc. It's got its story. It's got completely fresh characters that you've got to get to know. It takes time to re-establish Batman as well. It doesn't just assume you know what he's about. Treating the audience like that, even if you're a fan of the animated series, it lets you get sucked into the film-specific world in a way that it can both feel part of and completely distinct from the animated series. The added budget and things like that with the film let so many interesting things happen. We're going to not talk about the CGI Gotham City from the start because that is a sore spot in the film.
Although you can tell it's CG, I do still really like that opening credit sequence. I think just because of the music, the choir Batman theme that they play is so good.
That's exactly one of the things that I think the budget really helped with, because what it let them do, it takes the classic animated series theme and adding those operatic vocals to it makes it feel epic, grand, and tragic because of the pitch of the voices, which is amazing. And I don't think the CGI City was terrible. It still was a decent enough representation of Gotham. Having Gotham shown in that bleak way made it seem both beautiful and disgusting all at once, which really helps then bolster the hand-drawn Art Deco style of it going forward. And it just adds that essence of just grandiose tragedy throughout the whole film, just permeates every part of it. If you want an opening to set a tone, I would say this is one that you could study, get the right sort of cues from.
Although it opens with Batman stopping criminals, that you obviously throw in the Phantasm as well, which is kind of an interesting twist on that situation, especially as being a dark mirror of Batman. I think the animation all throughout was really good. I do have the style, but I like how you use it to get the emotions of the characters, and also how they use it to kind of visually show a difference between, like, not just Batman and Bruce Wayne, but also Bruce Wayne in the flashbacks versus Batman now. The film's editing is quite good. What it does well is that it helps explain both of the narratives that you're seeing very well. It's not confusing or jumpy when you're going from one bit to the other. Although, like, in the first half, it is more flashback oriented, it's still important because it gives you all the setup for the present.
It shows Bruce and Andrea had that strong relationship. So when you see her again later on, there's this distance and coldness. It might make you start wondering what happened there. Why did that go that to that, and you see some more of the relationship, and it starts to inform the flashbacks and lends a sense of imposing doom. Even though you see Bruce get these bits of hope, it just tears it down. The back of your head always goes, this doesn't last, this doesn't last. It makes the flashbacks even more resonant because it gets this precious quality to it in Bruce's life. And because you're invested in seeing Bruce be happy, they set the character up really well and they make you care about him really early on. So you've got this just desire for Bruce to be happy, and you know he's not going to be. They still make you feel it. They show these wonderfully emotional moments that just play really manipulatively with them, and things like the way they shoot the parents to be so imposing. Seeing those elements get stripped back and stripped out, and the imposing parents get put back in as it goes to pot. As you know everything's going on, you let yourself get your hopes up because you want to, because the film wants you to, and the performances want you to, the cinematography wants you to, and it just batters you back down. But it was coming.
As much as we're talking about the darker elements, I do still think it's very entertaining and works well as an action film. You know, all of the action scenes are animated really well. A couple of them stand out, especially Batman running away from the police. The final fight between him and the Joker, like both of them are very, very extended and big, tense.
They're brutal, they're nasty. They're amazingly creative as well, and they've got some great moments. Like, one thing that I will always remember from this film, because of just how vulnerable it makes Batman in the action, is when the police are bearing down on him, his cowl's going and he's bleeding from his head. His cowl's gone. And, you know, he throws his cowl up as a distraction like that, but that's not the end like it normally would be. The police are still there after him because they know that trick. And it shows not only that Batman's got a bit of experience in Gotham, but also he's not this infallible guy. And when Andrea comes to save him, it gets that hope up again and again. So the action drives that story forward, drives that tone forward in such a way that you can't remove it. It's not just grand action, which it is. It's not just well animated and fluid, which it is. But it's also this thing that just pushes your experience of the film forward and emotionally. And it adds quite a bit to it because it forces the relationships into new gears, and it also sets up this ever-present sense of danger for Batman. Like, this is one of the only times I've walked into something and gone, Batman's going to have some trouble here. I knew he'd come out of it at the end of the Joker and the Andrea, but I did forget for a second.
Any movie that does that is doing something correct. Like, especially with the added violence, it helps. Because even though in the moment, I will admit that, like, when Bruce finds out that Andrea is the Phantasm, initially I wasn't sure about him going after and fighting the Joker, but I kind of see the point of it story-wise, that it's very much he's trying to do things his way. Although it seems to be working, it ends with them like both pretty injured. You know, Andrea's stepping in, and it's almost like she's going to decide to do things the way that she wanted to do them because she's thinking, this is what I have to do, and what you're going to do is not going to work. Because she straight up acknowledges that what she's doing is not healthy or sane or anything like that, but she still wants to do it. She still has the desire, again, for vengeance. So I do think that like gave a unique element to the climax. We must have been talking about the two leads as well. How the other characters are used, like Joker specifically, I think they use him fairly well in the film. They tie him into the story personally because he was a member of the gang that was responsible for the death. In fact, they imply that he probably was the one who killed her father.
He's there, and you can miss that he's there. There's the way in the facial design that you're like, that is him, and because you know what the Joker's like, you know that it could happen.
I think he's the one walking out of the house when she goes in and finds his dead body, and you don't see anybody else, so we just have to assume that it was just him. No, and the other ones were murdered like just for being part of the gang that was like pressuring him and stuff like that. You give him that personal time, and he's both a threat and also kind of a source of humor. His energy does enliven the film when it does kind of need that. Like, some of the stuff they do with him is really weird and creative. You know, him giving Arthur that laughing gas and stuff like that, which is pretty scary too. And the main thing is having those robots as well, like that robot who's supposed to be a stand-in for his wife. It just is true to the character.
He feels both like a wild, vicious animal and a prankster that he kind of presents as all at once. He does seem like he's having fun. Something that, you know, I think is quite essential to the Joker. But it makes him scarier. So when he's talking to Sal Valestra, Sal starts pushing a little bit. The Joker's letting him. The second he touches him, you just see something snap in the Joker. You're suddenly there like, oh my God, this is bad. You get that full danger alarm. That alone just tells you how much a vicious murderer the Joker is. And then when you turn around later on and you see Sal's corpse with that big wide smile and just completely white, it's horrifying.
What makes it even more interesting is that Sal was his boss as well, like used to be his boss. He was the leader of the gang, wasn't he?
Yeah, Lestro was heading up the gang, so he was Lestro's chauffeur, the Joker was, or at least something like that. The fact that, the Joker is now someone like that terrifying, just a thing of like the effects of Gotham.
This is a demonstration of the from nobody to nightmare trope. Used to be just a guy, like now he's higher than you'll ever be. I liked how Alfred was used as well. There's not a lot that I remember about Alfred in the series proper. So for me, this one is probably the most memorable and noteworthy usage of him in both the flashbacks and in the present story. I think the bit that sticks with me the most is the ending, like that speech that he gives where he basically does just kind of sum up Bruce and Andrea. That is basically what he's doing, but I think it's very, very effective. It is there to try and reassure him that he couldn't have done anything. He never lost himself to vengeance. Kind of a good, nice thing to tell him.
Him being kind to Bruce and trying to help him. You do get the paternal sort of side.
So that bit where Bruce says to Alfred, like, oh, I must be going nuts. And Alfred says, if I may be so bold, Master Bruce, I'd say quite the reverse. So basically what he's saying is that marrying a woman is the sanest thing that you can do. And it's the best thing that you could do. Maybe. And this is early on as well. This is before he's even become Batman. So underlines the point of he had that chance, but he just wasn't able to take it because of what happened, and that leads to obviously like probably the most iconic scene of the film, the bit where he puts on the mask for the first time. Chronologically, this is when the Batman of the animated series becomes Batman of the animated series.
Like one of the most definitive moments in the series. It just gets Alfred and Bruce's relationship so well.
What I think makes it so great as well is that it's not at all like a positive thing as well. I compare that moment to the moment in Batman Begins where he stands up in the bats for the first time, because in both of those instances he is kind of becoming Batman for the first time. But whilst that was quite good because he was learning to embrace his fear and get over his fear, in this case it's more like he's succumbing to fear rather than embracing fear.
He's surrendering to his pain and to his fear, probably for the final time. It's tragic. Him becoming Batman is his epic score, but it's not heroic. It's not brilliant. Alfred is horrified. It shows that Batman is a creature that needs pain. Batman almost feels like it's feeding on Bruce. As long as Bruce is hurt, he can be Batman. As long as he's hurting, Batman is strong. That's what scares people. That's where he scares people. That's where he can use fear. He has got to have nothing left. To save anyone else, he can't save himself.
Thankfully, there are a few like funny moments in the film to help it not be like too serious as well. Alfred walking in on Batman and Andrea making out twice. That was in the past and in the present.
The judo bit.
It's unexpected too.
Also just a really nice way of getting in something romantic because you bought it. The voice acting, we've not really talked about the voice acting.
Oh yeah, what this does for Kevin Conroy is that as iconic as his voice work is, I do think this is better than a lot of his work in the animated series.
Harvey. No.
Because this gives him the opportunity to voice Bruce Wayne before he becomes Batman, and he does a great job. He does really show a distinct difference vocally between the past and the present.
I think this film gives him probably the most emotional range he's had in any Batman role that he's taken over the years. So you get not just this indestructible badass, which is, Kevin Conroy's bread and butter, is what he does amazingly well. You get the broken side of the man. This one puts it front and center, and Kevin Conroy kills it. There's a reason that it is the definitive Batman voice. When I'm reading the comics, that's what I hear in my head. It's subtle, it's layered, but it's also this very powerful masculine thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely representative of who he is as a character. Yeah, and also Dana Delaney, who has some DC animated history as Lois Lane, voices Andrea, and I thought she did a pretty incredible job as well, particularly once you know that she's the Phantasm as well, and she just changes, and she changes completely, and she just plays that like vengeance-driven person that we didn't see throughout the film. Like I thought she did a really great job there as well.
She did. Mark Hamill's Joker, I mean, what can we say that has not been said?
He did really well too, I think.
I think my favourite element of his performance in this is the way he ramps from comedic to like a threatening, menacing monster back to comedic and mirth constantly. That and his laugh at the end, which was probably one of the best Joker laughs he's ever done.
The laugh when stuff is exploding.
Yeah, when everything's exploding around him, yeah.
Well, people have seen that like bit out of context as well. But yeah, but even in context, it works really well. So I would consider Mask of the Phantasm to be definitely, it's by far the best DC animated film, and definitely one of the best of the 90s by far. Best Batman film of the 90s, definitely. In 72 minutes, it adapts the character perfectly. In 72 minutes,
if you want to get absolutely everything that Batman is, in a really short space of time. This film does give it to you.
It's probably the thing worth watching. Maybe if you haven't seen any of the live action Batman films, I would say this is one to watch even beforehand. It might like raise your expectations a little bit high. Like, okay, this captures it, and then let's see in live action what you can do with him and the other characters that surround him. And it just is a really great film. And I'd have to watch all the Batman films to know where I stand on it compared to the other ones. But this one I do think is really like special.
Something that excites me about the new one is that Robert Pattinson is being quite bold and making the comparison. There's similar things, and that's anywhere close to true. I'm really excited.
Gauged my faith that you can tell really good stories with him as well. I hadn't seen anything Batman related in a while, and this was just a really good reminder of what you can do with him. So on the next episode, bit of an adult animation double feature, we are going to be covering Persepolis. Until then, see you. What would you say is your favorite episode of the series?
I think it's The Man Who Killed Batman. I quite like the fact that Batman's not the main character of it, because it gets to the core of a lot of the villains really quickly in the way that they react. Like Joker's funeral of Batman was just incredible. Also, like to kind of see like the impact of Batman on Gotham and a lot of the ways that the criminal society works. And I really like just seeing someone who got into it and almost get consumed by the animal that is Gotham. I think it really sets up that world that Batman pushes through. So when he makes a triumphant return at the end of that episode and he's not dead and he's still pushing, he's still fighting and doing all of that, despite having the perfect opportunity to just disappear, it makes him seem like that much more heroic because you get to see the absolute lowest of Gotham. Honourable mentions to Heart of Eyes, which I've mentioned, and Almost Got Him.
Almost Got Him is an amazing episode and one of the most creative episodes they ever did. A strong favorite would be Baby Doll. Like the entire episode is a really great tonal balance as well in terms of taking what could be a strange, silly premise and milking it for genuine drama and pathos and presenting one of the most interesting and tragic villains in the series. A character who was kind of a one-off, but she was done really, really well. I think it culminates in perhaps like the best and most emotional ending of any of the episodes. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it. Even just watching it out of context, that sequence is so powerful and it just uses the visuals to just have a really, really like sad conclusion.
It is brilliant. Like, I know exactly the sequence you're talking about. I think also that moment nails Batman. And even modern comics don't nail him like that anymore. The core of Batman has been for a long time.
Describing it would be a bit of a spoiler. I do totally agree.